So it's always a pleasure to talk to people who are at a very early stage of their career. And you might have noticed something very particular about scientists, that whenever they try to justify their subject, they immediately begin with slides that say how many deaths are this particular disease is causing, right? Or the amount of dollar of waste. So obviously, when it comes to antibiotic resistance, I could do the same. You know, I've got these frightening slides with apocalyptic visions, how many deaths it will cause. But due to the time of brevity, and that's the only reason why I skip it, I would just suffice to say, yeah, we are facing these bugs. We had this golden era of antibiotics where we could use antibiotics to kill most of these dangerous bugs all around. But apparently this time is ending, and we are facing that an era where antibiotic-resistant microbes are causing more and more death, and et cetera, et cetera. So as a matter of fact, we are facing a kind of arm race, if you like, an arm race between the pharmaceutical companies who are desperately trying to develop new drugs and new antibiotics, which usually takes 10, 15 years of time. But on the other hand, these bugs evolve resistance. So as a matter of fact, resistance is a phenomenon that occurs at the light of speed. And it's a very rapid evolutionary process, if you like. That's one of those very rare occasions where you cannot actually ignore evolution because it happens so fast. So that's exactly what we are investigating. But before I get into it, let's just ask, where are these bugs are coming from? Where? It's don't blame the bugs, it's us. It's due to us because the consumption rate and the amount of antibiotics used, both in the clinics and in the agriculture, is huge. It's over 500 tons or whatsoever annually. So if you consider, for example, China, where the antibiotic consumption is extremely large, then you would say that, yeah, this is supposed to be a milk glass. Anyway, so 50% of the dairy products, so the milks, are actually contaminated with antibiotics. You may ask, why is that a problem? Okay, I consume some milks with antibiotics. It's all over. It's also in the soil, in the waters. Why should I care? As long as it's only in the environment. Now, the problem is that these bacteria have a dirty tricks called horizontal gene transfer. Basically, it's a genetic exchange of material from one species to another. So they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can actually, there's enough, if resistance occur in the soil or in your microbiome, and then these genetic material can readily taken up by the bloody pathogens in the clinic, and that's bingo. So it's, when we speak about the spread of antibiotic resistance, it's not only about the spread of the pathogens per se, but the genetic material that confers resistance, which is actually a much, much faster process. Right. So what do we need? We need new antibiotics, which are supposedly resistant-proof. And the problem is that we have very few tools that can investigate resistance in the laboratory. And secondly, and this is a complementary thing, let's try to resensitize the antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Let's use some combination of antibiotics which are already used in clinic and try to use them wisely. Now that's the big question, how can we use them wisely? And this is what in the next 5 minutes or so I will focus on. So first thing first, we have to study evolution in real time in the laboratory. How we do that? Okay, again, a slide, you cannot see a thing, but just look at me and that will be just enough. There are test tubes, and in the test tube, you put some microbes in under ideal condition and start dividing, growing at enormous rate. But there's one trick in the experiments. You put more and more antibiotics in the test tube. What happens? There will be one single mutation coming up that will provide some low level of resistance to the bug. It will have an advantage compared to the others. It will spread in the population. Okay, so now you've got one mutation. You increase the dosage, and it happens again and again and again. So you end up with antibiotic-resistant microbes in the lab within 30 days containing 4 or 5 mutations, but with enormous increase in the level of resistance. So let's just say, again, a scientific figure, but who cares, right? So basically, 300-fold increase in resistance, in antibiotic resistance in 30 days. Frightening, huh? And basically 4 or 5 very specific mutations responsible for this process. Okay, fair enough. We all know that it happens in due time, but does it have any downside? Is it just that they are superbugs, and that's it? We are doomed to death. So hopefully, there is some hope, and basically, and that's what I'm actually saying, is that when they face one single antibiotic and they evolve resistance to one antibiotics, there can be two things happening. They are developing resistance to multiple other antibiotics, and that's multi-drug resistance. And there are basically many different ways of achieving it. So even though they are facing a single antibiotic, they become resistant to multiple. So that's cross-resistance or multi-drug resistance. But there's also another interesting thing, which was completely neglected in the literature for nearly 60 days, not 60 days, 60 years. And it's the opposite pattern, and this is collateral sensitivity. When they develop resistance against antibiotic A, they have an increased sensitivity or susceptibility to some other specific antibiotics, right? So it's the opposite pattern of cross-resistant. So this was basically, there was a paper over 60 years ago that described this phenomenon, so very old concept, but for nearly 60 years, there was no follow-up experiments. And this is actually what we did to do it systematically. So what you see here, a network. Again, you cannot see a thing, but the point is, what do you see on the network? There's one important thing. There are some dots, and these are the antibiotics, and they are highly connected. And they are connected when resistance to antibiotic A caused increased susceptibility to the other one, right? So when the two are connected, it means that resistance to nitrofurantoin increased sensitivity to whatever it is. I cannot read it. So the point being is, and that's all I'm saying, that the network is dense. There are loads of antibiotic pairs that show such properties, and that's basically, that's basically the finding. And this is what we explored in details and understanding the functional mechanism behind it. So you might wonder, why should you care? Well, we believe we should care because these are the ideal antibiotic combinations. If you use antibiotic pairs which show such properties, this kind of collateral sensitivity properties, then evolution together in combination or in a so-called drug cocktail, then these are the ones against which resistance will not evolve. And actually, as a matter of fact, we proved that point in the laboratory. So this is what we are struggling with at the moment, and to demonstrate that this is what actually happens. And now, just to show you how efficient this protocol is, we just show you a recent figure. Now here comes some proper science, I'm afraid. Okay, so we've got this antimicrobial peptide. No, don't care what it is. Anyway, it's a new type of molecule that could be used in combination with an antibiotic called tetracycline. So what you see here is the level of resistance on the y-axis. And here you've got a Y-type strain, which is sensitive. And here's the other one, which contains 3 or so mutations with an extremely high level of resistance. No surprise so far. What happens if you add just a tiny little amount of PGLA, this antimicrobial peptide, to the medium next to the antibiotic? So it has, as you can see, no effect whatsoever on the Y-type. So the level of resistance remains the same, low. But look, this is what happens to the resistant bug. So basically, we resensitized the bacteria using just a tiny amount of PGLA to the medium. So basically, the level of tetracycline resistance dropped dramatically. And this is what we would like to use in the future, also in clinical trials, to demonstrate that this is actually effective and could be used for therapeutic purposes. So based on that, what we actually do, we are very much in designing new molecules. That's where we become really fanatic about it. So peptide itself is not good for therapeutic purposes. It's good for doing fun in the lab, but you want to do something more fundamental. And basically, we use the scaffold of these peptides to design drugs, so-called peptidomimetics, artificial molecules, with the same functional properties, but they are more stable, etc. And they've got some other good properties. And once we have these molecules, as a matter of fact, we already have a few of them, we use in combination with antibiotics, which are already in the market, to actually demonstrate that it can be used to resensitize the antibiotic-resistant bacteria. We also did that in vitro, so we know that it works in the lab. What actually remains to be done is to demonstrate that it also works in vivo, for example, in a mice experiment. Okay? So this is pretty much what I wanted to say today. So if you happen to be interested who we are, what we do, then check our website or follow us on Facebook. Thanks.